I want you to picture something for me. It's a Thursday. Ordinary, forgettable Thursday. The kind of day where nothing is supposed to happen. You're standing on a step stool in your hallway, half awake, coffee going cold on the kitchen counter, doing the most boring domestic chore known to mankind. Changing the battery in your smoke detector, and then you find the most unexpected thing. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. That was me, Briar Reed, 41 years old, high school history teacher, father of one, owner of a slightly overweight Labrador named Biscuit, and a man who up until that Thursday believed the most dangerous thing in his house was the expired milk. Theo kept putting back in the refrigerator. I unscrewed the detector cover, reached in for the battery, and my fingers touched something that was absolutely, definitively not a battery. I pulled it out slowly, the way you pull something from a dark space when part of your brain is already screaming, "Don't look at it." It was small, black, roughly the size of a thumb drive but rounder, with a tiny lens no bigger than a pinhead staring right back at me. A camera. A hidden camera. Pointed, and I want you to really let this land, directly at my bedroom door. Now, most people in that moment would have done one of two things: called the police, or ripped the thing out of the wall and thrown it into the street while yelling words their neighbors would never forget. I did neither. I stood there on that step stool for what felt like a full minute, heart doing something athletic in my chest, staring at this tiny little device. And then, and I genuinely cannot explain this, I put it back, screwed the cover on, climbed down, picked up my cold coffee, and went to work, like a completely normal person. Now, before you start judging me, let me give you some context. 6 months before that Thursday, I had started seeing a therapist named Dr. Nora Charles. I didn't go voluntarily. Theo, my 15-year-old son, who apparently missed his calling as a family interventionist, sat me down one evening, slid a business card across the dinner table like he was some kind of tiny corporate lawyer, and said, "Dad, you need to talk to someone. And I mean someone who isn't me or Biscuit." I looked at the card, looked at him, said, "I'm fine, Theo." He looked back at me with those eyes, Joanna's eyes, God help me, and said, "Dad, last Thursday you made breakfast, ate it, washed the dishes, and then 20 minutes later came back downstairs and made the exact same breakfast again. You didn't remember doing it the first time." I opened my mouth, closed it. The eggs were still in the pan, he added, completely unnecessarily. So, Dr. Nora Charles. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, her office on Wesley Street, which, yes, same name as my neighbor Nathan Wesley. A coincidence I mentioned to her once, and she did not find nearly as amusing as I did. Dr. Charles was sharp, precise, and had the kind of calm that made you simultaneously feel safe and deeply scrutinized. She wore reading glasses she never actually used for reading, just held them. I spent 3 sessions trying to figure out if that was a therapy tactic before I realized I was probably deflecting. She had a term for what was happening to me. Dissociative episodes. Not dramatic, Hollywood blackout stuff. No waking up in a field covered in mud. Just gaps. Small ones mostly. A meal made twice. A conversation Theo remembered that I didn't. A phone call I had no recollection of making, showing up in my recent history at 2:17 in the morning. "It's your mind's response to prolonged grief," she told me in that measured voice of hers. "You lost Joanna 14 months ago, Briar. Your brain is still negotiating the weight of that." "Negotiating," I repeated. "Yes, my brain is negotiating. Is that word bothering you? It makes it sound like my brain has a union rep." She almost smiled. Almost. Dr. Charles was a Fort Knox of almost smiles. But here's the thing she told me, the thing I filed away and forgot about until the camera. She said, sometimes during these episodes, people do things, functional, purposeful things. They cook, they drive, they have conversations, and they leave evidence. Things that feel foreign to them when they return to awareness. If you ever find something in your home that you don't remember putting there, something that confuses you, don't dismiss it. Bring it to me. I nodded and said, "Sure." I had not in my wildest imagination thought she meant a surveillance camera inside a smoke detector pointed at my bedroom. So there I was. 3 days of walking past that smoke detector every morning and every night. 3 days of making Theo's lunch, grading papers about the American Civil War, taking Biscuit on his slow, waddling evening walks, and pretending my ceiling had not been watching me sleep. 3 days of asking myself the question I was too terrified to answer. Did I put it there? Because here's the thing. Nobody tells you about losing chunks of your memory. It's not just the forgetting that wrecks you. It's not knowing what the other version of you is capable of. It's looking in the mirror and thinking, I know this face, but do I know this person? I started noticing other things in those 3 days. Small things. A screwdriver on the kitchen counter I didn't remember taking out. A chair in the hallway positioned at a strange angle, facing the smoke detector. My laptop browser history shows a search at 1:44 a.m. for best discrete recording devices under $50. I sat at my kitchen table staring at that browser history for a long time. Biscuit put his head in my lap, which is his standard move whenever I'm either sad or holding food. I wasn't holding food, I told him. He licked my hand. Unconditional love from a dog is wonderful, completely unhelpful, but wonderful. Then came day 3. Theo came home from school, dropped his bag by the door with the particular violence only teenagers can bring to the act of bag dropping. Opened the fridge, stared into it for 30 seconds like answers to life's questions might be inside, and then closed it and looked at me. And said, Hey Dad, who were you talking to outside your room last night, around 2? The air changed. I was at the stove, stirring pasta that suddenly felt very far away. I kept my back to him for exactly 2 seconds longer than I should have. Long enough to arrange my face into something that didn't look like a man whose entire internal world had just cracked down the middle. I turned around. What do you mean? I said. Casual? Breezy. A completely normal father's voice. Theo pulled himself up onto the counter, a habit Joanna used to scold him for, and that I could never bring myself to stop, and said, I got up to get water. Your light was on. I heard you talking. I thought maybe you were on the phone, but it didn't sound like a phone call. What did it sound like? I asked. He thought about it for a second. It sounded like you were giving someone instructions. The pasta boiled over. I turned back to the stove, turned down the heat, gripped the counter with both hands and stared at the steam rising from the pot, and thought about a camera behind a smoke detector, and a chair facing a hallway, and a browser search at 1:44 in the morning. And I thought about what Dr. Charles had told me, word for word, because it chose that exact moment to come screaming back into my memory with perfect clarity. They leave evidence, things that feel foreign to them when they return to awareness. I gripped that counter harder, because the question was no longer did I put that camera there. The question, the real question, the one that would keep me awake every night from that moment forward, was what exactly was I trying to record? If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. I didn't sleep that night. Not even a little bit. I lay in my bed, in the dark, staring up at the ceiling like it owed me an explanation, which technically it did. And I did that thing anxious people do where you run the same thought on a loop until it stops making sense as a sentence. What was I trying to record? What was I trying to record? What was I trying to record? By 3 a.m. it just sounded like noise. Biscuit was at the foot of the bed snoring with the confidence of a creature who has never once questioned his own sanity. I genuinely envied him. I would have traded places with that dog without a second thought. Eat kibble, nap 16 hours a day, never once install covert surveillance equipment in your own home. Sounds like a life. I picked up my phone, put it down, picked it up again. I opened the browser history. The 1:44 a.m. search was still there. Best discrete recording devices under $50. I scrolled further back, and that's when I found it. Something I had completely missed the first time because I'd stopped scrolling too soon. 3 entries above it, time-stamped 1:31 a.m., same night. How to know if someone is entering your home without your knowledge. And above that, 1:28 a.m., signs your house has been broken into but nothing is missing. I sat up slowly, because that changed the entire narrative in my head. I had spent 3 days quietly building a case against myself, collecting evidence, appointing myself judge and jury, practically writing my own psychological autopsy, and I had completely skipped over the possibility that maybe, the other version of me wasn't unraveling. Maybe he was trying to protect us. The camera had to have footage. That was the thought that finally got me out of bed at 6 a.m., moving through the house quietly so I wouldn't wake Theo. I stood under the smoke detector in the hallway and looked up at it the way you look at something you're not sure is safe to touch. I unscrewed it again. The device was a Wisecam Nano. I know because I Googled it right there in my hallway in my pajamas. Like a man doing the world's most unsettling product review. Small, cheap, efficient. And here was the detail that made my stomach drop completely. It had a micro SD card slot, and the micro SD card was in it. I took the whole thing to my laptop, sat down at the kitchen table, poured coffee I would not taste, and with the specific energy of a man who is absolutely not prepared for what he's about to see, I plugged it in. The files were organized by date, motion-triggered recordings, 30 seconds to 2 minutes each, dozens of them, weeks worth. I sorted by oldest first, and I pressed play. The first few clips were nothing. Hallway. Empty. The occasional blur of Biscuit wandering past at odd hours, because that dog had the sleep schedule of a college student. Me walking to the bathroom at night, unaware, looking exactly as dignified as a person looks when they think nobody is watching. Which is to say, not very. Then I got to a clip from 5 weeks ago. 2:09 a.m. The hallway is dark, but the camera's night vision makes everything that pale greenish gray that immediately makes any footage feel like a horror film. I'm watching the empty hallway, 30 seconds of nothing, and then a shadow moves at the far end. I leaned forward. It wasn't me. The build was wrong, the height was wrong. Someone was standing at the end of my hallway, very still, just outside the frame of the camera's full reach, standing there like they were listening, like they were waiting. The clip ended. I clicked the next one. Same night, 2:14 a.m. Empty hallway. Empty. Then the shadow again. Closer this time. Close enough that for one frame, one single frame, I could see the edge of a shoulder. A jacket. Dark fabric. My coffee cup was halfway to my mouth, and I put it down because my hand was not steady enough for hot liquids. I kept watching. Over the next hour, I went through every single clip. What I found, laid out chronologically, was this. Whoever this was, they had been in my house 4 times over the past 5 weeks. Always between 1 and 3 a.m. Always in the hallway. Never, as far as the camera showed, going further than the hallway. Just standing there, just watching my bedroom door. I pushed back from the table and sat there in my kitchen in the early morning quiet and thought very carefully about my next move, which is a generous way of saying I sat completely motionless for 4 minutes, because my brain had essentially put up an out-of-office sign. Theo came downstairs at 7:15, still in his hoodie, hair doing something abstract, and stopped when he saw my face. "Dad, you look like you've seen a ghost." "That's not a denial. Theo, cereal. Please." He poured himself a bowl, sat across from me, and studied my face with those forensic eyes of his. Joanna used to do that, look at me like I was a document she was proofreading. I never could hide anything from either of them. "What's going on?" he said. "Nothing. Everything's fine. You're sitting in the dark with your laptop and your coffee is full, which means you made it and forgot to drink it, which you only do when something is seriously wrong." I looked at my coffee cup. He was absolutely right. I hated that he was absolutely right. "I found something," I said carefully, "on my laptop. I'm handling it." "What kind of something?" "The adult kind." He gave me a look that communicated with devastating teenage efficiency that he found me deeply unconvincing. Then he ate his cereal. But before he left for school, he stopped in the hallway, right underneath the smoke detector, and looked up at it for just a half-second too long. I watched him do it. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. I called Dr. Charles at 8 a.m. and told her receptionist it was urgent. By 10 a.m. I was in her office, sitting in the chair across from her, and I put my laptop on the coffee table between us, turned it to face her, and played her the 2:09 a.m. clip without saying a single word. She watched it. Then I watched it again. Then she took off her reading glasses, the ones she never actually used for reading, and set them on her knee and looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before in 6 months of sessions. It took me a moment to identify it. She was unsettled. "Briar," she said, "how long have you had this camera?" "That's the problem," I said. "I don't know. I don't remember buying it. I don't remember installing it, but the search history on my laptop suggests that I did, and the footage suggests that whoever I installed it to catch has been in my house at least 4 times. "Silence. The searches," she said slowly. "Walk me through them." I turned the laptop back and read them to her in order. The break-in search, the entry without knowledge search, the camera search. She listened with her hands folded, nodding very slightly in the way that usually meant she was constructing something in her mind. This is consistent, she said finally, with a protective episode. A protective episode, I repeated. Your subconscious registered a threat before your conscious mind acknowledged it. You acted on it. You put measures in place. I installed a camera in my smoke detector, Nora. She almost smiled. Almost. You installed a camera in your smoke detector, Briar. That's not normal behavior. The question now isn't why you installed it. The question is, who have you told about living alone with your son? Who knows your schedule? Who has access to your home? And that question, that clean, precise, surgical question, walked me straight into a memory I had been stepping around for weeks without realizing it. Nathan Wesley, my neighbor Nathan. Who had a spare key to my house? Who I had given it to 8 months ago after I locked myself out, during an episode I barely remembered. And he had shown up with my spare like he'd had it ready, which meant I had given it to him before that day, which meant I didn't remember giving it to him at all. I looked at Dr. Charles. I think, I said very quietly, I know who's been in my house. She leaned forward. Briar, before you do anything, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm listening. There is a phrase I gave you. Early in our sessions, a trigger phrase, something I asked you to memorize so that if the other side of you ever needed to communicate something urgent, you'd recognize it. My chest went very still. You told Theo to say it to you, she said, if things ever got dangerous. The world tilted slightly on its axis. What's the phrase? I whispered. She looked at me with those calm, steady eyes. Think, Briar. What did Theo ask you 3 days ago? And just like that, standing in her office, laptop warm on my knees, Biscuit probably asleep on my couch at home, every single piece locked into place with a kind of terrible, perfect clarity that you can never unexperience. Who were you talking to outside your room last night? Around 2? That wasn't a casual question. That was a message. From me. To me. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So thank you for real. Let me tell you something about clarity. Real clarity. The kind that doesn't arrive gently with soft lighting and a motivational soundtrack. The kind that hits you like a car that ran a red light. Sudden, total, and rearranging. That's what happened in Dr. Charles's office. 1 second I was a grieving, confused, slightly sleep-deprived man with a memory problem and a fat Labrador. And the next second I was something else entirely. Something that had been assembling itself quietly in the background for months. Building a case, laying groundwork, installing cameras, while the front-facing version of me wandered around making duplicate breakfasts and forgetting to drink his coffee. I stood up from that chair slowly. He has a key, I said. Nathan has a key to my house. Dr. Charles stood up too, which she never did mid-session. Briar, I need you to go through proper channels. Call detective. He's been standing outside my son's bedroom door, I said. At 2 a.m, for 5 weeks. The room got very quiet. Call the police, she said firmly. Tonight, do not confront him alone. I picked up my laptop, picked up my jacket. Briar, I heard you, Nora. I said it the way people say things when they have absolutely no intention of doing them. I drove home slowly, which for me is unusual because I'm the kind of driver that mild-mannered passengers grip the door handle around. But that afternoon I drove like I had all the time in the world. Windows down, one hand on the wheel. Thinking about Nathan Wesley. Nathan, who had moved in next door 14 months ago. 2 weeks after Joanna's funeral, practically to the day. A detail I had filed under coincidences because grief makes you generous with coincidences. Nathan, who was friendly in that slightly too available way. Always outside when I pulled into the driveway. Always ready with a wave and a, "How you holding up, buddy?" Always knowing somehow when Theo had after-school practice and I'd be home alone. Nathan, who never got mail. I know because I collected mine every day and in 14 months I had never once seen anything in his box. Not a bill, not a flyer. Not even one of those pizza coupons that somehow find every address in America. I had noticed that once, absently, and done nothing with it. The other version of me apparently had noticed it and started a file. I got home. Theo wasn't back from school yet. I had approximately 90 minutes. I went straight to my bedroom closet. and I want to be very clear that what I found there was not something I consciously put together. This was the other Briar, the one who remembered things, planned things, worked quietly while the lights were off in the front of the house. On the top shelf, behind a box of Joanna's things I hadn't been able to open, was a manila envelope. I stood on my toes and pulled it down. Inside was a handwritten note, my handwriting, but tighter, more deliberate than my usual scrawl, like someone trying to write carefully while furious. If you're reading this, you finally found the camera. Good. You're not crazy. His name is Raymond Folks. Nathan Wesley is not his real name. Check the envelope. My hands were not shaking. That surprised me. I think I had moved past the part of this experience where things made me shake. I was in a different register now, something lower and steadier. I reached into the envelope. 3 printed pages. Public records. A photograph. Raymond Folks. 51 years old. 2 prior convictions. 1 for stalking, 1 for breaking and entering. Both in different states. Both involving recently widowed single parents. The photograph was a mugshot. I held it up. Nathan Wesley smiled back at me from his own arrest photo. I sat on the edge of my bed and read every single page. And somewhere in the reading, the last warm traces of confusion left my body completely. What replaced it was cold, deliberate, architectural. The other Briar hadn't just left me evidence. He had left me a blueprint. I found the rest of it over the next 40 minutes. It was almost impressive, honestly. Like a scavenger hunt designed by the most paranoid, most prepared version of myself. Under the bathroom sink, taped to the back of the cabinet, a USB drive. On it, every clip from the SD card, already edited, time-stamped, and labeled, plus 3 audio recordings I had made on my phone during episodes I didn't remember. Recordings of Nathan in his own driveway, talking on his phone, using his real name twice. And in the kitchen junk drawer, underneath 3 dead batteries and a takeout menu from a place that had closed 2 years ago, was a folded piece of paper with a single name and phone number. Detective Rena Marsh. She knows. Call her. I unfolded it and stared at it. The other Briar had already made contact with the detective. I called the number. She picked up on the second ring. Detective Marsh. This is Briar Reed, I said. I think you might have been expecting this call. A pause. Then, Mr. Reed. Yes. Where are you right now? Home. Is your son with you? Not yet. He'll be back in about 40 minutes. Good. I need you to do exactly what I say and nothing else. Can you do that? I looked out my kitchen window. Nathan's car was in his driveway. He was home. That depends, I said, on what you're about to tell me. What Detective Marsh told me, in the clipped, efficient language of someone who had been building a case for longer than I knew, was this. The other Briar had contacted her 6 weeks ago. He had walked into the precinct during what must have been an episode, laid out everything, the searches, the suspicions, the key, the pattern of Nathan's movements, and asked her to run Raymond Folks through the national database. She had. Raymond Folks had an active warrant in 2 states. The stalking charge in Ohio had escalated. His last known victim, a widow with 2 children, had required a restraining order and a relocation. He had been tracked to our city 3 months ago and then gone quiet until my smoke detector found him. We've been watching him, Marsh said. We were waiting for him to make a move we could arrest him on, something that would stick this time. How long were you planning to wait? I asked, very calmly. Mr. Reed. He was in my hallway, I said, outside my 15-year-old son's bedroom door. How long? Silence. We move tonight, she said. I need you to act completely normal until I give you the word. Can you do that? Nathan was outside now, doing that thing he always did, washing his car in the driveway, watching my house from under the brim of a baseball cap, with the casual surveillance of a man who thought he was invisible. I've had a lot of practice acting normal, I said. You'd be amazed. Theo came home at 4:30. I had dinner going, real dinner, not the tragic reheated sadness I usually produced on weekdays. Pasta, garlic bread, the works. Theo walked in, stopped, and looked at the stove with open suspicion. Who are you and what have you done with my father? Sit down, I said, and don't look out the front window. He sat down immediately, because Theo Reed, 15 years old, son of Joanna, was sharp enough to know that when his father cooked a real meal and told him not to look at something, the situation had graduated. Dad, he said quietly, what's happening? I put a plate in front of him. sat across from him. And for the first time in this entire ordeal, I told him the truth. Not all of it. Not the dissociation. Not the episodes. Not the blueprint in the closet. That conversation was coming. Just not tonight. Tonight I told him what he needed to know. Nathan next door isn't who he says he is, I said. The police are handling it. Tonight. I need you to stay inside. Stay away from the windows, and trust me. Theo looked at me for a long moment. Is this why you've been weird for 3 days? I've been weird for considerably longer than 3 days, but yes, he almost smiled. Almost. He really was his mother's son. Okay, he said simply, and picked up his fork. That one word, okay? From my 15-year-old kid who trusted me even when I'd given him approximately half the information he deserved. That hit somewhere deep and structural. I held it together because this was not the moment, but I filed it somewhere permanent. At 9:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. Detective Marsh. One word. Now. I looked out the living room window. 3 unmarked cars had materialized on our street with the quiet competence of people who did this for a living. Nathan's lights were on. His car was in the drive. What happened next took 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. At 9:47, the cars arrived. At 9:51, 2 officers went to the front door and 2 went around the back. At 9:53, the front door opened. At 9:55, Raymond Folks, who had introduced himself to me as Nathan Wesley 14 months ago, who had shaken my hand at Joanna's funeral reception and said, "Anything you need, neighbor," walked out of that house in handcuffs. He turned his head as they walked him to the car, and he looked directly at my window. I was standing there, not hiding, not stepping back into the dark. I was standing right there in the light where he could see me perfectly, arms folded watching him with an expression I imagine was not particularly warm. He stared for a moment. Then they put him in the car. And that was that. I went upstairs, knocked on Theo's door. "It's done," I said through the door. A pause. Then, "Did the good guys win?" "Yeah, buddy," I said. "We did." I heard him exhale. Then, "Dad? Yeah? I'm really glad the smoke detector needed a new battery." I laughed. Actually laughed. The real kind, from somewhere that had been locked for 14 months. I stood in that hallway, under that smoke detector, and I laughed until my eyes were doing something embarrassing. And I didn't try to stop either thing. I went back to Dr. Charles that Thursday, sat in the chair, crossed one leg over the other, and I told her everything, start to finish. The envelope, the blueprint, the USB drive, Detective Marsh, all of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How do you feel?" "Honestly, I feel like I owe myself an apology," I said. "I spent months thinking the other version of me was the dangerous one. Turns out he was the one paying attention." She looked at me over those glasses she never used for reading. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "the work now is to let him and you become the same person." I thought about that. "You think that's possible?" "I think," she said, "that a man who installs a camera, builds a case, contacts a detective, and protects his son, all while the conscious part of him was too overwhelmed by grief to function, is not a man who is broken." She paused. "He's a man who refused to stop fighting even when he didn't know he was doing it." The room was very quiet. Outside her window, the city went about its business, ordinary, forgettable, the kind of Thursday where nothing is supposed to happen. I uncrossed my legs, sat forward. "Same time Thursday?" I said. Dr. Charles almost smiled. This time, she let it land. "The camera is still in the smoke detector." I left it there. Not because I'm afraid anymore, but because some versions of yourself deserve to be seen. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.